Hello and welcome back to What the Wrestling. We haven't done this in quite a while, and I'm just going to change the format because there's just been big changes and I have to change with them. Instead of just talking about weird stuff that goes on in the world of wrestling, I'm just going to talk about wrestling in general. It's some of the stuff that I found interesting in the last month. A lot of times it would be exactly how it is in the old version of the show. But for the most part, it's just me talking about stuff that happened and my thoughts about it. So let's do that. We're going to start in WWE during their Money in the Bank pay-per-view. A couple interesting things happened there. Like the two winners of the Money in the Bank title contracts, briefcases, things. In the women's division, we had Liv Morgan win, who later that night wound up cashing in immediately against Ronda Rousey after her match, and took advantage of the worn-out Ronda Rousey to become the new women's champion. Austin Theory lost his rematch for the United States Championship against Bobby Lashley, but later that night was a sudden surprise entry into the men's Money in the Bank ladder match, and he wound up winning. So Austin Theory became the new Mr. Money in the Bank, and swore that he would cash in at SummerSlam at the end of the title defense for Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar. More on that later. Vincent Kennedy McMahon, the CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, was facing a lot of allegations this last month. But don't worry, when all of that came to light, he said on a following Raw that he wasn't going anywhere. A week or two later, he then announced his retirement. Say what you will, but it makes it almost seem like there was more stuff that was going to come out. But enough of that. On to SummerSlam. There was a build-up for wrestlers to come back, or arrive, or something. There was a lot of vignettes with a ruined building, a bunch of relics of different wrestlers from the past, and someone walking amongst them. As that turns out, that was the returning Edge, who returned to seek his revenge against the faction that had betrayed him and kicked him out, the Judgment Day. The title match, a last man standing with Brock Lesnar against Roman Reigns, resulted in Brock Lesnar driving down with a tractor, which he then used to lift the ring at one point in the match. And as promised, Austin Theory did come down to try to cash in his Money in the Bank title shot, but was beaten down horribly by Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, and he was unable to. Guess A-Town's clowned, if you will. Moving on to AEW. They had an event of their own. A few, actually. But more on that in a second. They had the multi-week event Fyter Fest. Dumb name. But it took several weeks of the actual show. This wasn't a pay-per-view. This wasn't anything special. This was episodes of Dynamite and Rampage for 2 weeks that resulted in this whole event it's a weird thing AEW does. But it was made even weirder because it fell along the Discovery Channel's Shark Week and was sponsored by Shark Week. So you had the occasional people who were wearing shark fins on their heads, and there was a particular match with where Chris Jericho's Jericho Appreciation Society was forced to be locked in a shark cage so they could not interfere. And at one point, they had a surprise ally show up to try to unlock the cage, and she couldn't. She was fumbling with the key and the lock and couldn't unlock the door. And we found out that it turns out they could have slipped out through the bars the entire time. 'Cause they did. It's kind of dumb. But they made do with what they did. But anyway, as I mentioned, Fyter Fest was actually just specially marked episodes of the regular show, rather than an actual event. Which leads to my complaint that AEW has too many events. They should, their premium pay-per-view events should be it, and should be what the show builds up to. That's kind of wrestling tradition and how it usually works. But that's just one of AEW's problems. I also think they have too many titles. Between their newly acquired Ring of Honor properties, the titles they already have, and stuff currently being held by AEW talent from other companies, AEW is currently defending 20 titles. And that is a bit too much. Once the cross-promotion stuff is done, that'll help. But you still have the Ring of Honor stuff. And some of the actual AEW titles are unnecessary and could go. It's a mess. It's a huge mess. But that kind of does it for what I have in mind right now. It's a little sudden to go back to the wrestling, so I don't really have much on this list. But I knew with everything that was going on, at least in WWE, that I really wanted to talk about wrestling again. Plus, I had a few requests to start talking about wrestling again, so here we are. And I will try to have more to talk about, including stuff from like Impact. We haven't heard from them in a while. But I'll have more stuff to talk about next month. But until then, I'll see you in the ring.